Awesome.
Anna, would you like to do?
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to all of our panelists as well. So welcome everyone to our IBM Developer event. This event is Accessibility 101, Designing for Everyone. So thank you all for joining. I'm going to answer a few of your burning questions right at the start. Introduce a little, those of you who haven't been to an IBM Developer event in the past. I'll introduce myself, and then I will introduce our speaker facilitator for this evening, and she will get started with our panel discussion. If we can go forward one.
Yeah, there it is.
There we go. Okay, perfect. So I'm sure you're all wondering, hey, how can I access what we're going to be watching, what we're going to be covering, where are all the links? Do not fear, Jenna is here. So I've just posted in the chat the event slides, the live stream recording, IBM Accessibility Badge, and the IBM Developer Austin Meetup Group. We will talk about a few of these things as we move forward, but you have them all in the chat for you. We'll also share them again at the end. I want to go forward one more. This event will be, the recording will be uploaded to our Crowdcast account immediately following the event. Once the recording's ready, we'll upload it there. So if you want to share it with others, or you're not able to stay and you want to access the recording later, you're able to do that at this link. Again, it's also in the chat. And then Marina's going to talk to you a little bit about this later on in the event, but I wanted to share with you initially, this is a link to our IBM Accessibility Advocate badge. Now, when you go to the website to read more about the badge, it will say that it is for IBM employees. There's some updating on the information on the page that needs to be updated. However, you do have access to the course, you do have access to all of the quizzes, and you do have access to all the information and access to the badge and a claim. So I just wanted to let you know, because you'll probably have questions when you see it. But we highly recommend all of you to take a look and become an accessibility advocate. So if any of you have attended IBM developer events in the past, for anyone who's comfortable, I highly recommend you share if you would like to in the chat, so we can all get to know each other a little better. I'll start with myself. You're probably wondering who's been talking at you for the past 4 minutes. My name is Jenna. My pronouns are she, her. I am an IBM cloud software engineer. I recently became a developer advocate at IBM as well. Something that I love are my dogs. I have Yorkies. They are wonderful and can be very annoying, but they're definitely the best part of my day every day. And then a quirk. So I'm sure I'm seeing some familiar faces in the crowd. I have an obsession with tuna. It's a real thing. Tuna melts, tuna salad. I can't help myself. But I judge an entire restaurant and all of their food on how well they do their tuna. So that's a little bit about me. So if this is the first time you're coming, welcome, welcome. It's great to meet you. We will be available in the chat for any questions you have or any trouble that you're having. And there will be time for Q&A throughout the panel discussion as well. So I would like to pass things off to our wonderfully fantastical speaker for this evening, Marina, who put this whole thing together and put together this wonderful panel. And I want to pass things off to her so you can get to know her a little better and have a wonderful event.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenna. And I would just like to welcome everyone again to Accessibility 101. The reason, so I'm Mrinalini Sugosh. I go by Myrna. That's the name Jenna's been referring to. I am a staff software engineer at IBM Cloud, developing front-end interfaces for an internal tool. I'm also a federated developer advocate, became that very recently in May, and that's what helps me advocate and run workshops like these. That's a plug for my LinkedIn, follow me. But overall, what I want to say about this panel is that as I have been developing front-end applications at IBM, I came across this term accessibility, and I got further into it while we were developing accessible apps. And I was shocked that it wasn't included as part of our daily curriculum at school. It was requirements in internships. And I realized that there's this space and talk about accessibility that we really should address. And that's why I went on a search to, grab some of the best in the industry. So here you are going to actually listen to some people who are firsthand users of accessible products. You're going to listen to people who are experts in their field, designers who actually design accessible applications. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists and allow them to talk a little bit about themselves. So let's see. First up, Laura. Oh, I think you're muted.
There you go. Everybody can hear me well?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to not only share some of my experiences, but also learn, because I know everybody here is going to go home. I mean, well, we're already home, but go to work the next day with a different mindset, because accessibility is something that is it touches you. It makes you realize our humanity. But with that being said, my name is Laura Silva, or Laura. I am the Vice President, Accessibility Design Lead for Bank of America. I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia, but lived in Dallas, in the Dallas heat. Super excited to be here. What I do in my my daily life, besides being in 100,000 meetings every day, is to help designers and developers and the QA teams understand not only why accessibility is something that we have to do based on law, but that we have to implement based on our, oath to design products that truly are for everybody. And it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of meetings. But I have a dad who is who has a body disability, and I use closed captions. My mom doesn't speak English. My brother has arthritis. So to me, accessibility is just a daily a thing that is in my life every single day. So I'm excited to share some of my knowledge and learn from this panel. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. That's an amazing introduction. And next up, we have Sunish. Sunish, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sunish Gupta. I'm in Boston, Massachusetts, and I am actually working right now for Amazon in their customer service area to look into accessibility issues, whether they're customer facing or employee facing. And I've been in the accessibility field for about last 20 years. I became blind later in my life. Before I used to create values in Silicon Valley. And then when I became blind in 2001 and 2, I started looking into all these technologies, found a huge gap. So I developed the world's first portable reading machine for the blind with Ray Kurzweil. And then I came to MIT to pursue further a master's in system design management to look into how we can incorporate accessibility into all our corporate design practices and development efforts, because that was a huge gap, and this was about 8 years ago. Then I started my own startup called Easy Alliance, where we were developing some new approaches to accessibility, developed a measurement system called AXMAX. It is under review by IEEE to become a de facto standard. And then I basically started looking into various universities in the Boston area. I taught courses in accessibility, created the whole curriculum for graduate and undergraduate students with Northeastern University and Tufts University and MIT. So it was a great experience, but the needle was moving very slowly. So then I jumped to the corporate bandwagon in working recently for Amazon last year. The connection with IBM I had is had a chance to work with Frances West. Some of you know, she was the IBM's first chief accessibility officer. So I did my internship back in 2011 when I was still at MIT. So it was a great pleasure, and she has written an excellent book. I think everyone should read that, Authentic Inclusion. Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunish. That was a wonderful intro, and I learned a lot of things about you as well. So thank you so much for making the time to be here as well. Next up, we have Charu, Ms. Charupandi, please.
Hi, yeah, I'm Charupandi. I am with IBM. I am the SME, accessibility SME and accessibility advocate with the IBM Accessibility Leadership Team. We used to be part of IBM Research until the end of last year, where we got moved into IBM Design, which I feel is perfect because to me, accessibility should not be an afterthought. It should start with inclusive design. And I've been with IBM like almost 15, 16 years now. I started my career as mostly a back-end developer, moving to doing some middleware services with MQ and Tivoli. And then for the past almost, let's say, 10, 11 years, I've been doing accessibility. In research, our focus was more towards innovation and AI and stuff like that. But now under design, we are more focused on inclusive design and then trying to make it, trying to provide guidelines for all over IBM. And our focus is how do we make it easy for IBM products to be accessible.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charu. And, she hit one of the points that I'm very passionate about is including design and including accessibility in design. And we will be covering that topic in the panel. So definitely stick around to hear more about that. And then right after we have Tiffany. Tiffany, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm currently based in Seattle, working as a designer at Microsoft. And the specific team that I'm on right now is the Input and Accessibility team. So it's kind of a mouthful, the actual name, but generally we focus on both accessible process. So similar to what Charu was saying around how can we ensure that we think about accessibility earlier in the design process. That's something that I look at. And then in addition to that, also designing for the in-house assistive technologies that Microsoft has, like Narrator and Magnifier and all of that jazz. Formerly, I was on the inclusive design team, so thinking about our inclusive design methodology at Microsoft. So I think my interests span across input and thinking about how input can really unlock access to digital experiences for people, but then also from an inclusive design perspective of how can we start co-creating and really thinking about the needs of people and including their voices, so not just getting their feedback, but actively bringing them along in the process at every step of the way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, thanks for joining us today. Um, and I believe next up we have Randy, who's our final speaker. Randy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity to join the panel today. So I'm Randy Horowitz. I've been with IBM since 1999 in a variety of roles. I think uh, telling my story will, my brief story anyway, will kind of tell. So I got hired out of college to be a developer. I'm totally blind, have been since 1977. And so I got out of school as people did at that time in the late 90s and wanted to write code and save the world and write the next awesome algorithm and all that sort of thing. And I kind of noticed in my first 3 or 4 years that a lot of the IDEs and stuff like that weren't very accessible. And so I ended up spending most of my time figuring out how to make my work life accessible, you might say. And so I took the opportunity to move to Austin, where I've been since 2003. I worked on a similar team to Charu, where we wrote accessibility guidelines for developers. I wrote accessibility techniques. And I've had a variety of roles since then, but being totally blind, I've always kept my sort of passion in accessibility. I'm essentially a user interface development manager now, so I'm kind of on the developer side, but I try to span everything from design all the way through to providing also sort of end user kind of impact statements and just like that to our developers. And that's kind of my I've had a variety of roles, but accessibility kind of spans across all of those, and there's not really a way to get away from it, I guess I would say, for me, nor do I want to. So that's kind of my introduction. So I've kind of spanned. I've been the developer, had design input, and now I'm one of the manager folks. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Randy, and for your introduction and for giving us your perspective today. So let's get started with the panel without too much delay. But before we really get started, I kind of wanted to make this statement that, at a minimum, after we've heard these introductions and everyone's passion, I hope we're all here because we realize that a minimum criteria for any designed product or service is the fact that it should be usable by everyone. And this is actually a civil right that's covered by the American Disabilities Act. And, it's a law. But sometimes what happens is, I saw this quote recently on LinkedIn, is we equate compliance to usability. And I think as we're progressing through this panel, we should really think about it and know that just because an application, your web application, even your personal website is compliant with ADA standards or compliant with what we're going to learn later, like Aria standards and W3 standards, it doesn't mean that it's easy to use or completely accessible. So please do keep that in mind. And without further ado, let's get started with our panel. So I would like to actually pose this question to our two designers that we have on board, Laura and Tiffany. How does your work and life intersect with accessibility and actually creating inclusive design? Either of you can feel free to get started.
Okay, let me start.
Go ahead.
Yes. Let me start. Let's break the ice. Okay, so how does your work and your life intersect for accessibility and inclusive design? Well, I believe, and I'm an advocate, and I am a keynote speaker for intersectionality. It means intersectionality is that literal intersection of what make us people be people. So I advocate for Black people, but Black people being, women, and the difference between women and Black men. I advocate for women's rights and the different rights between white women and Latino women. And I advocate for this very special place in the middle that is accessibility and how it doesn't really care where you come from and what color of your skin is or what language you speak. It affects you, it affects your family, and it affects our daily life. But as a woman of color and as an immigrant and somebody who understands what it is to not have, understand that unless we are mindful of our designs, there's going to be a very big percentage of people with disabilities who are not going to be able to access the experience because they might not have the latest technology or because they might not, you know, own their own computer and have it set up so that it works for them, or you know, it they don't have, or because they don't have the ability to go to the library and use a library lab, computer. So to me, when I think about accessibility and inclusive design, is they don't separate. You know, you have to have one to have the other, otherwise they do not exist. You know, if you cannot talk about inclusivity without having accessibility in it, otherwise it's just a fallacy. And I live in a world where there's a lot of fallacies of statements. Women's rights mostly diminishes Black women and women of color and Native women. So I understand that our intention matters and our attention to detail matters, and how we design things to actually benefit everybody, regardless of. It's a conscious decision that we have to make as designers. It's a conscious decision that we have to make as developers. It's a conscious decision that we have to make as PMs and the people that write the checks for us to have the money to then hire the people that know how to do this stuff. So that's this is the passion that I have, because I do believe in equity and I believe in equality. And it starts with, can you use this? Can you use your phone? Start with that.
Wow, very well put. And I've definitely took away the statement about you can't have inclusivity without accessibility, and that's a niche that's often missed when we talk about inclusiveness. So I'm so thankful that you brought that up. Tiffany, did you have anything to add to that as a designer, and how your work and your life intersects with accessibility and inclusive design?
Yeah, I guess even before I talk about myself, I guess I have the perspective, it's very similar to Laura, where it's not just about the disability community. Oftentimes, it's about all the other marginalized groups whose needs and whose voices weren't really considered in the making of our society and a lot of our legal system today. So if you look at even the environment that we live in, I think the environment just bleeds into every aspect of my and your work and life. So, for example, within the office that I work in, that I don't work in now, but that I work in Redmond in Studio H, the elevators actually turn off when the fire alarms go on. And so one of my coworkers, he has limited mobility. We were basically working in his office one day, and then the fire alarms went off unexpectedly. It was not a drill, and we were stuck on the third floor, unsure of how we were going to escape or get out of the building safely. And so that's just one example of how accessibility intersects with work in perhaps an unintentional way or an unpredicted way, because the environment that we've created in our professional settings just wasn't made for people with disabilities. And then similarly within my life, I think while I'm privileged to be able-bodied, I understand that in many instances, situationally, I could be considered disabled, whether that's because I went to a concert last night, so perhaps I'm hard of hearing the next day, or maybe I'm walking around carrying a ton of stuff, and so I'm unable to use my phone using my fingers or with any dexterity. And so acknowledging the moments where I don't have the same lived experiences as someone with a disability, but I would truly benefit from a lot of the solutions for accessibility in those moments, I think is really important.
Wow, that was very well said, especially on how it is important, how accessibility, the topic of accessibility and inclusive design is actually important for people with all abilities. I would like to get like a little bit different perspective, maybe from Randy, on how does your life and your work actually intersect with accessibility and inclusive design?
It's quite well married, you might say, and uh, I'm going to say some things which are pretty blunt here because I think I think we all have, and I think it. So for me, the ability to access information, I saw this. I remember this really cool quote from a PSA years ago, which said what is it? Let's see. The digital divide is the information is the I'm sorry, let's try this again. The digital divide is the distance we allow between people who have the power of information and the people that don't. And if there is a situation, and IBM is quite good about this, either at work or at home, where I do not have equal access to the power of information, that means accessible websites, accessible, then I'm on the other side of the digital divide. And I'm sorry, I'll get a bit passionate about this. For me, that means I can't feed my family. So one of the takeaways that I want everybody to kind of take away here, and it's nothing that anybody does, this isn't a battle, this isn't a war, this is trying to gain understanding. But when we make some of the decisions we make, people say, why do you get so passionate about this? Well, if I cannot feed myself because of some of the things that can happen, then that's kind of a big deal to me. My wife is totally blind also, so we manage. I think that I have seen a lot in my years of this panel is one of those steps of things becoming more and more equal. But that's it is uniquely married to every single thing I do every single day. So that's my rather blunt and trying to get across I think some of the things that face all of us. But this is why I don't have a choice but to help advocate, and so that's what I do.
Awesome. So I'm going to move on to the next question, but I'm going to tie this following question up to the previous question. So the previous question was, how does your life and work intersect with accessibility? But this next question is more about, what does accessibility and designing actually mean? Is it more of a process, or is it actually about the product? And I would actually want to direct this at both Charu, who has tremendous experience, like years of experience in accessibility, as well as Sunish, who is a product manager. So I really want to understand from you guys, do you think it's a process? Is it a product? And how does this intersection actually work? What does it mean to you?
Sunish, you want to
I
go
can
first?
see. Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I look at accessibility as something which should definitely have these three attributes. So one is making sure it is sustainable, okay, robust, and it is basically it's it should be easy to implement, okay. So sometimes these three goals can conflict with each other, but when we are setting out to design anything, I think process becomes a prime imperative to make it work in the long term, to make it robust. And if we treat it just as a product, as a one-time project to do accessibility, I think it will be a big pain point every time you have to do and fix things. And if you treat it like more like a defect-driven or compliant-driven activity, I don't think it will last very long enough. So the best way is to infuse into your DNA of your organization, into your teams, train your teams properly. So definitely from my point of view, even though I'm a product manager, but that's just a title, how Amazon assigns it. But basically, essentially, it infuses into every. So in fact, we train our product managers and putting a training program together for our product managers, how they can infuse as part of every process which they do, as well as their team does, So I look at it as a very role-based, as a process-driven activity. And product is just a term or word which means very broadly. It's more like a service as a product from a user perspective. But essentially, I think for accessibility, definitely process takes a heavy weight.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your insight. Charu, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, definitely. So, like I said, I pretty much breathe and work for accessibility day in and day out, which is that I'm really grateful for because this is really passionate to me. So to me, accessibility means breaking down barriers. You know, as it's about bridging the technology limitations, giving everyone equal access. I think Tiffany or Laura was mentioning, it's the environment that does not meet the person's ability. Uh, the person's ability could be anything, but we have to make sure that we bridge those gaps in technology by breaking down those barriers. So for designers and developers, it means that we build our products, our websites, our tools and technology that are inclusive for everyone. And like some of the folks were saying, that anyone of us can be have a situational disability at any time. So we have to consider all these people and everyone around, and make sure that our products are meeting everyone's needs. So I can give an example like how we try to elevate accessibility into the culture and mindset of everyone inside IBM so that they are more inspired to do what is right rather than, with a stick that is make sure that everything is compliant. So an example I can give is, when you say design an alarm clock, so people can go back and then kind of start, designing a clock which is more or less like an alarm clock that you would see. But to change that culture and mindset, what we are now doing is instead saying that design an experience to wake up a person. And you should remember that maybe some of your clients could be hard of hearing. So when you put it that way, then suddenly, and our design people are forced to think outside the box, and that's where innovation is obviously happens naturally. So that is what I feel, that it's about thinking about everyone, thinking about people that are not like us or around us most of the time, thinking of all these different scenarios that, hey, I can listen to a video in a crowded a hall, so captioning is really beneficial to me. So those are the kind of outside the box thing I feel really helps when you're trying to break down and bridging your technology to me to
Hey,
productive and do their day-to-day work.
hey, Sharu, can I
Absolutely.
add something?
Yeah, sure.
I think design has also, there's been multiple hackathons, right? Or ideathons to solve the exact kind of problems you've solved. Here's kind of a situation.
Right.
Now come up with a solution. And I think we've seen, and then I'd also add, I think that as life has gone more mobile, to Laura and Tiffany's point, people want to talk to the phone and still look at the road, right? So I think the mobile generation has also kind of helped. You wouldn't want me driving, of course, but I think it's also helped that mobile has kind of, I think, raised that, I think, in everybody's perspective.
Exactly. And
Those are great points.
exactly, when I'm driving, I'm using my both hands to drive. So, I have limited
Right.
capability, ability. So, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. No, those are some really great points about, how this intersects and how it can actually be a process tying it back to what Sinish was mentioning. And actually, it's a great segue to our next question, which is actually about why is accessibility important for people of all abilities? And we kind of answered this, but I would like to phrase this question a little differently, right? Just so that we don't reiterate. Why is it important to corporations? We mentioned that ideas, or we should always put the product or accessible processes first and stuff like that. But why is accessibility important to corporations, and how can us as like developers, designers, or product managers actually advocate for accessibility if it's not already there? Because a lot of developers that are joining us, especially in this call, are often freelancers or working in startups. So how do they start to advocate, and why is it important? How do they show the why of why is it important?
I guess
Yeah,
I can.
Laura, go for it.
Oh,
I'll go second. Yep.
oh, okay, cool. Just very quick. Why is that accessibility important for people of all abilities in the corporation? Why does corporation have to care about accessibility? I work at a bank, so because there's money in it, first of all, not in the way that you of selling products, not, but literally there is money in it. If I am not incorporating accessible guidelines into the design, then somebody is not going to be able to check their bank account. Somebody is not going to be able to plan to set up a meeting with an advisor to buy a house, start saving for college, to start a family. Some to me, accessibility is a business. Is business perspective. There's literally money in it, and in the other side, I also used to work for Amazon. That was actually my first job at Amazon Search, and I helped create guidelines for accessibility for designers, for QA, pretty much what I'm doing here, but in a smaller scale, just for the search team. And doing the data, I realized how much buying power the community has, and if we don't start implementing, we're leaving money on the table. Literally. So it's both a matter of understanding the humanity of people, but understanding the business that comes with it. Because at the end of the day, we're in companies, and companies wanna have profit, and there is something called customer loyalty. And if a customer knows that you understand their needs, not just because you sell or you provide the service that they need, but because you provide it in a way that they can then utilize it, they're gonna stay with you uh, till the end of time. That's the whole point of a business is to have somebody and not let them go. But if my dad, who recently had a injury, so he became quadriplegic, cannot longer access his bank account with Bank of America, he's gonna go somewhere else, uh, where he can. He's still a man. He's still the man of his house, so he still want to do the things like Randy said. He still want to provide, not only for his, for my mom. He doesn't have to provide for me, but for my mom, but for himself. Um, but he also want to have that independence of being able to do it by himself. So that's how you pair. That's how business have to think about it. It's a pairing of the humanity and the business practice of it. Like we gotta be. And everything is not so kumbaya. We gotta make
Right.
we gotta make money. We gotta make
Yep.
money to pay the bills. We gotta let people,
Yep.
and then we have to allow people to make the money to pay their bills. And accessibility is a way that we create that pathway.
And
Absolutely.
word gets around. And word gets around if you're in the community, in the blind community. I'm sure it's true in all communities. Word gets around. So if an app was working really great and it breaks, it's kind of a word on the street thing. So that kind of thing does happen. So
They'll come for you. For sure. I know that. I used to read customer feedback, as a way for us to understand what customer needs. And customers are blunt, and they will tell you this does not work, and I'm closing this app, and I'm deleting this app of my phone. Never talk to me again. It's like a breakup note, and they're entitled and they're right to do so because it's business. We're here adults. We're here to make money, and we're here to allow people to make money for them. So that's how business. That's how I see it from business.
Wow, it's a great way to actually pair value prop with the humanity side of that as well. Sunish, you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, I just want to say that, I mean, of course, all points you mentioned and Randy mentioned about digital divide, they're all valid because why you want to use the business, it improves UX for everyone, you know, and as you know, the curbside effect or the ramp effect, we call it, it improves UX for everyone. And of course, it's the right thing to do. But unfortunately, you know, many of us know that in the industry generally, you know, it has taken a more of a compliance driven, or it's one of the legally right thing to do, and it's become a more of a risk management initiative, accessibility. But I think we should start flipping the coin now. We should look on the opportunity side of things as opposed to on the threat side of things, you know. So just to add to emphasize that that mindset is changing, and it has been shifting quite well more towards the opportunity side. Even though you see a lot of lawsuits around and all those things are coming through, but people are getting the right mindset, and I think design-driven mindset is the right way to approach it in overall. And that has all the benefits all over. Why do you want to leave 20% of your addressable market, you know, without accessing your products and services, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. No, I was agreeing. I'm completely agree with it. I just wanted to throw out a fun fact for people who don't, you know, they want to show a value prop, they want to show numbers. You know, did you know that 1 billion people, according to WHO, in this world live with a disability? And that's actually more than 15%. And now if you actually top that with people who are aged over 60 years old, that number rises quickly up to 22% of the world. That is the 22% that Sunish was referring to, that Laura and Randy were referring to. That's the 22% you can capitalize on, and that's the value prop you can definitely sell to your, you know, the higher ups at the startup. So that's how you advocate as a developer. You find these facts because it is a huge market, and it is important in the human aspect as well. So you'll be doing a great service to yourself as well.
Yeah,
did
probably
Tiffany or
I was just going to say that I can just add to that, you know, like you said, you know, over 15% of the population has a disability, and we have a moral obligation to include them. But not only that, designing for 15% of people with disability improves the experience of the 85% because there's so much of overlap, and accessibility can enhance, extends your market research, market reach. So it's a win-win for you and for your corporation.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Totally agree. It is a win-win.
It's all about the money, guys. It's all about the money.
Hey, it boils down to that, right? So, you know, as we are talking about accessibility, as I do work for IBM, the plug is we have this mission statement for accessibility, right? Accessibility is not just a practice, it's a culture and a mindset. So I'd like to kind of segue to the next question, which is, you know, what's kind of the language and etiquette around accessibility? Words are really powerful. Words and ideas are how we communicate. Words are how we communicate ideas, essentially. And it's important. Language is very important, and etiquette has been of importance and is gaining more importance. Like Jenna mentioned at the beginning, hey, state what your preferred gender pronoun is. So things like that we, you know, are acknowledged and becoming allies for the LGBTQ community or the women community. How can we do the same for the accessibility community is the big question. And that question actually is something I found very common throughout the internet, and something that a couple of attendees had actually messaged me privately. But so before I want to transition to that, this is on the slide, there is this terminology of the difference between a person with a disability and a disabled person. Which one is right? Microsoft, IBM, Apple, a couple of them have kind of put forth the statement that the etiquette should be that you put a person first. So it should be that you say a person with a disability, or if it's, instead of saying an autistic child, you would say a child with autism, so that you put the child first. I kind of want to pose this question to our end users, Randy and Sunish. What did they feel? How can we best be allies, and what is the appropriate terminologies for all of us as allies to use?
Sunish, you want to go ahead first?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, if you see how the disability word has evolved, you see even 50 years ago or many years ago, disadvantaged or handicapped, those were acceptable terms. Now disability is kind of in the mainstream media, and I think it's shifting. Many times we see them using the word challenge, visually challenged, physically challenged, So I think it's a ever-evolving paradigm, and I think we have to be sensitive. That's the important thing. Having a good empathy, that's important. Whatever your local, your regional area calls for it, use the terminology. Different cultures have different norms. If you go to Asian cultures versus European versus US, you might see these nuances. So you got to be a little bit more sensitive to what the localization is. So I think it's kind of addressing a little bit more specifically with that, but there's nothing wrong with using visually challenged or even the word disability. But I should say, being a technologist or being working for a technology company, I think it's more appropriate to use that the people are not disabled, persons are not disabled. It's the technology which is disabled, actually. Right?
Wow.
And that's what we had
That
to
was
fix
very
it.
well put.
Yeah.
No, that was very well put. Yes, absolutely. No, absolutely. It's the bugs in the technology that we have to fix, the
Right.
things that we missed out on, right? The features that we didn't incorporate from the beginning. Randy, did you have anything to add on to that?
Well, thanks. Well, we'll definitely have to steal it's the technology that's disabled. I would agree in general. To me, I think putting the person first, to me, it's always the actions that have spoken a little bit louder. So there's ways of showing empathy. So there's this, I'm showing my age a bit here. There was this, I don't know, film strip, something like that, where some person is watching a blind person getting ready to cross the street. And it goes into this quick frame, he grabs the blind person, throws him over his shoulder and walks him across the street. Or he grabs the cane and yanks the person across the street. And the whole point of it is just ask, right? So do you need help? Or what do you need? As opposed to like the ridiculous pick somebody up and carry them across the street. Just say, hey, need help getting across the street? So I think empathy is important. I think it's just remembering it's okay to ask what help you need and how you ask it. I think more than the terms. Now, that's for me. I mean, I do think it's important to lead with a person who happens to be blind or whatever, but the actions, I think, and how you approach things has always been the bigger piece for me, and that's where I would put it.
That was very well put as well. Thank you so much, Tanisha and Randy, for your insights, because oftentimes you get these questions and sometimes people are hesitant to actually ask these questions and learn about this. So I'm really glad that you guys were open to answer this question.
What? I have the same questions because, not all disabilities are the same, right? So I've gotten a little tongue-tied around somebody in a wheelchair, which you could say is kind of ridiculous, right? But it's like, my God, did I just guess the right thing? So even other people in the disabled community, I've had these so I'm glad people ask those questions because I've been like, oh, wait, what? Which is kind of funny because you get the idea. So it even happens to the rest of us who are also part of the disabled community, I would say.
Could I actually add on to that as an advocate and an ally? So I was listening to a talk that Ijeoma Oluo was giving a while ago. She's the author of So You Want to Talk About Race, if people have heard that book. So I don't claim credit for any of the stuff I'm about to say. But one of the questions that she fielded was, how do I know if this terminology is offensive to people? What are your thoughts around using terms like master or on GitHub, for example? And I thought Ijemo's response was quite valuable, where she said, it's going to depend on the person. If the person is offended by it, then just don't do it. If it's not hurting you, but it's hurting them, then don't do it. And so I thought that was really helpful. And just as an example from, I guess, my own work experiences and relationships, some of my deaf coworkers who I interact with, they say that they prefer the deaf community identifies strongly as the deaf community, or I am a deaf person, rather than I'm a person who is deaf. But I think it also varies a lot depending on the person. And so I always try and ask where I can.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yep.
That is awesome. And I guess just kind of a segue into that, how is it appropriate to ask these questions often and, have that check? Because that was one of the questions that popped up, like how often can I check with a person? Am I addressing the right things, or is it just being aware of the social cues and understanding if that person didn't approve of some statement?
Can I ask an ally to handle that one
learn.
first? Can I ask an ally to handle that one first? I'm kind of curious.
I was gonna say, if you don't ask, then how are you going to learn? How are you ever going to grow? Like as like an example for instance is you don't touch a black woman's hair. That's
Yes.
a fact. But if you ask me to touch my hair, I might decide to say yes, because some people want to touch curls for some reason. So it just, but that's me, and then if you ask somebody and they might say no, and that's them, and both are correct. So the way that I take it is, I work with people that have disabilities in my job, and I work with people from other cultures, and I am from another culture, and English is not my first language, and my culture is different. So if I don't kind of humble myself and say and say, hey man, all I know is that I know nothing. Go the Socrates way and ask the question, then how am I ever going to grow? And how am I ever going to then share that information with other folks to tell them, hey, if somebody else comes to me, I will tell them, I'm not going to speak for that person. You can just ask them yourself. Because we talk about disabilities like it's something that, and please feel free to, like I said, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But we talk about disabilities like it's this, ephemeral thing, this stuff that we cannot touch or play with or interact with. But disabilities are all around us. If you use a sidewalk, then you have used a system with that has disability in it. If you ever touch the button in a library or in like CVS to, like what I'm doing right now, I'm not opening doors. I'm trying to push buttons with like my elbows and like my hips to open doors. You're interacting with apparatus and systems that were created with the disabled community in mind. So it's not ephemeral. It's all around us, and because it's all around us, it is up to us, and it is like our job to then interact with people on a one-on-one basis, right? And ask them and learn from them, because you might get, hey, to me is I'm a disabled person, which is okay because there's nothing wrong with disabilities. And somebody else might say, hey, I'm a person with a disability, and you just learn. But you just gotta humble yourself and be okay with the fact that either that person is not going to want to answer you, or that person is going to challenge what you knew. But hey, that's what we're here for. We're here to grow. Nobody is born with the knowledge. So you just humble yourself and go ask the question. Grow some ovaries and go ask the question.
Nice. So, yeah, and just to kind of sum it up, I think Tiffany, Laura were you guys put it in a nice way. Like we heard from Randy and Sunish, who firsthand said what their viewpoints are, but then you talked from the viewpoint of an ally, which is what kind of brings up my next question is how can, apart from listening and apart from being cognizant, like Tiffany mentioned, and like Laura mentioned, knowing and being aware and being humble, how else can we be an ally, especially as a developer or a designer? How do you actively be an ally to the community? There are several things that we say male allies can do, for example, for the women's community, or we as if you're a straight ally, you can do that to the LGBTQ community. So how can you be an ally to the accessibility community? And I would open it up to Charu, Laura, or Tiffany to answer that because we could clearly see how great of advocates you guys are from this talk.
So yeah, if you want, I can go first. Like I said, to create that culture and mindset, I feel we should start by learning, educating ourselves. Like Laura said, we need to understand what are the pain points, what are the needs of these people, and start from there. Our process starts from research. So when you start from research, you should consider adding a disability as a persona in your maps, and then you should also try to incorporate people with diverse abilities. You want to include people with disabilities in your research, maybe shadow, a person or a colleague, and see how they function from day to day, doing their job. So sometime back last year, I think we had conducted 2 research studies, one with people who are blind and one with people with low vision, just trying to understand what is their approach to navigating a new site. What is their approach to trying to understand what's in an application? So then getting all that knowledge of what their needs are, I think we can then best be in a position to do our best as to how we can break down some of the barriers that these people have. So I say definitely, start with creating that empathy, learning, and then you will want to do the right thing. You won't be forcing yourself to just be compliant. You understand these people, so now you know what's the right thing to do.
Oh, that was very well put, including them from the very beginning. That's actually recently is when I came across this article that was actually written a couple of years ago. It's titled in the Huffington Post, it's titled Nothing About Us Without Us, Mantra for a Movement. And essentially the entire article reinforces what Charu was stating is you have to include a persona of for your design thinking processes. You have to start thinking from the perspective of a lot of different personas and a lot of different abilities. And that's when you can actually create a completely inclusive product. Now, I kind of want to ask this question where do you have any specific personal examples? I know I discussed this once with Tiffany is, was there a product where it made a huge difference when you actually started including a person with different abilities from the start versus a product where you kind of grew the product, started it, and then you thought about accessibility, and then it was an afterthought. You kind of bolted it on rather than building it in. So does anyone have any examples of what difference that made?
I can add some.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead, Randy.
If somebody else has something, go. I just thought of one.
Go, Randy.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So this we were designing some forms, and the design team worked with me on forms, and they had asked I think something like title was before name, or something that would be counterintuitive from a keyboard perspective. So we were able to rough out, it's a very kind of lo-fi kind of, we call it a tactile drawing kit kind of thing. And so we were able to kind of take the form elements from things we'd learned before and reorder them so that they both worked visually and also worked for a screen reader user. And so the fact we did that, a previous time we had consulted and not done the form fields in a way that made keyboard sense. But the second time we went back and did it and incorporated our feedback earlier on, and it kind of made a huge difference to the product, I thought. So that's a kind of simple example that I can give from about the last 6 months.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Anyone else have any other examples? Maybe how about ideation of a product? Has it ever made a difference to include that at like your, at the very beginning of your designs, when you start ideating and you're actually thinking about these different personas versus you forget to think about some persona?
When I worked at Amazon, just like 2 years ago, my team was doing a translation of our rendering platform, and so we were going through every single spec. I mean, I hope everybody here understand that like going from one rendering platform to the other is like moving a house, like piece by piece. You don't take the whole table. You gotta take the table apart and take out the table. That way. So it's very consuming because it goes to the minuscule, right? And actually that was my first experience of a rendering platform, of migration of rendering platform. But also it was that experience that got me into accessibility, because around that time, like I said, my dad became quadriplegic. And so I realized, okay, now he's not going to be able to use his hands to touch his phone. And he used to, he has my Amazon account. So now I thought, okay, now he's not going to be able to add anything to his cart. And that's how I thought about it, right? And so I came to my team and I asked them, hey, what are our guidelines? And I talked to some of the developers, and I listened to the screen reader, and I looked at the amount of clicks that it would take somebody to add something to a cart and to edit a field, and I experienced the experience. I closed my phone and I went to the screen reader and I used JAWS, and I started realizing and learning about this experience. And then what I saw that we had, our the rendering platform that we had wasn't, it just wasn't it just didn't cut it. It was just like, it's just like rice without salt. It's missing something. and in the migration, we started to add guidelines for accessibility, from not just the color contrast, but contextual alt text and clicks and labels and head instruction and zooming and resizing, and you can swipe when you use a screen reader. So what are they gonna use? And I mean, I then it became a whole, like, it became a whole new world that I was just in love with. Because then I knew that my dad then could actually add something to his car from now on. So to me, I knew what we had before, and I knew because of the experience that I saw with my own eyes, that what we had before just wasn't cutting it. And by adding these guidelines of accessibility, they're out there for everybody to just check and learn. And WCAG is coming up with 2.2 soon, so get ready for hover states, to come up and stuff like that. So like I started learning about this experience, and now I know, and that I have done my best, my possible best, to allow people to actually be able to add something to their cart, because in 20 clicks rather than 200, which we had before. So that's kind of how I see it, in a little anecdotal way.
Awesome. Did anyone else want? Go ahead, Randy.
I have a challenge for everybody in the audience to go back to one of your previous questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Pick your favorite website, and this is a persona that often gets forgotten about, and either turn off your trackpad or mouse or don't touch it, and try to navigate that site with the keyboard. I don't care what site it is, right? But try that. So if you want to try to gain, and there is a persona out there that's keyboard only, that because screen readers intercept keyboard keystrokes, for example, or and try that. You'll try to book a flight, try to do whatever. Maybe learn up a little bit on the shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts beforehand, but try that. That would be, if there's one thing I'd have everybody try, that would be something like that. So just to add to something you'd asked about earlier, Myrna. Sorry, I know there's a lot of questions to get to. I wanted to circle back and kind of throw that challenge out there. Yep.
This actually, it's a very nice way to wrap this discussion up on how we can be a good ally, and some personal anecdotes on how, being an ally, being an advocate actually made a huge difference in the product. The kind of next question is tying back to what Randy said, yes, go ahead and try a website, but how about these exercises? Design thinking exercises are not only for designers today, right? Teams use them often. We are often in playbacks and retros. It's a very integral part of agile methodology as well. So how do you make design thinking exercises accessible, especially when your team is using a platform maybe like Mural, where everything is drag and drop? So, and this was actually one of the questions from an audience. So does anyone have ideas on how we can do that, or how folks can, consider making their exercises accessible?
Sunny, you're going to talk?
Sure, go ahead.
Comment on that. Basically, there are a lot of softwares out there which are being developed, especially all the tools which designers and developers use. And in fact, they themselves are not accessible. But I think it's again bringing the awareness amongst that community, which makes the tools, or which makes the all these specialized software which design community uses. They themselves are not accessible, and I understand that there are definitely some inherent challenges there. But if the design is done from the ground up, thinking about accessibility users, I think it's a great value proposition. So.
Yeah, I think adding on to that, at least at Microsoft, we tend to do a pretty reasonable job at thinking about how can we ensure that our processes include accessibility, and about how we can make products that are accessible. But we haven't really done enough thinking yet into how our design practice can be accessible, which I think this question really touches on, where things like sticky notes and whiteboard, they really assume that a designer has a specific range of motion available to them. Or even, like Sunish was saying, the design tools that we use, these tend to be very keyboard and mouse centric, and they also assume that people are able to see the screen. And so as a designer who might not be able to see the screen, how would that person actually begin to interact with their team and collaborate with their team? I guess to give an example of how we do it on our team, oftentimes we'll designate someone to be the driver. And especially in these remote settings, what that entails is sharing your screen. You would probably be operating the mouse and the keyboard. Someone else would be ensuring that everyone's voices are heard. So if someone tends to not speak up as much or doesn't want to interrupt other people, just taking turns with asking people what their opinions are, especially because some people might take longer to articulate themselves or verbalize their thoughts. And so just assigning these different roles of allyship, I think, has been super helpful, at least in our design thinking exercises.
Awesome. That's a great suggestion, pairing. Charu, you had something to add.
Exactly. I mean, in our team, we have colleagues. I have colleagues who I have a colleague who's blind. I have a colleague who's deaf. I had a colleague who was low vision. So in everyday practices, like, we are so mindful that, even like doing a presentation, we have guidelines for all our team members, and we are trying to advocate that throughout IBM, that it is so important to just talk precisely on what you're trying to communicate. But if you have visuals in your slides, you have to make it a point to actually describe what the visual is. Say that, on the left you see this, and then that's how it connects to this piece in the middle, and to the left. So being mindful of describing what you're seeing, and also making sure that captioning is available for people who cannot hear. Just
Absolutely.
things like that, yeah, and advocating others do the same. We try to be inclusive, and even things like design thinking and mural. We try to annotate most of our mural exercises so that our blind colleague is able to get that read by a screen reader. So things like that, and because we have colleagues and we go through this every day, like using Slack, using GitHub, using design, as soon as we see these barriers, like, hey, communicate that to the respective teams, that it would be nice that so and so gets fixed, because this is how it is hurting us, and not letting is preventing our team member from being more productive. So today only I just read somewhere that Mural is employing a lead accessibility engineer. So I'm like, there you go.
Oh, it's perfect timing for a panel that they did that. But yes, I think I would kind of like to pose this question. We have these things pop up, like right before I transition more into the technical details. I want to pose this question of Randy mentioned, let's go to a website and check if it's accessible. But do we actually take the time ahead of time to actually make sure, before we send out a event link, like that's something that we had to make sure for this event, right? Before we send out an event link, is that event even accessible? And I know Sunish bared with us for over an hour the other day trying to get him up and running on platform. And believe it or not, there were unlabeled buttons. We'll get into what unlabeled buttons means for those of you who've not heard of them. But Sunish, what would you describe or even Randy, like what would you describe your experience when you encounter those things? Like, what's that first thought that you get when you see like these unlabeled buttons and you're completely lost? Like, to me as a
First of
visual
all, I would
user,
say, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say I was completely shocked, because in this day and age when we are in COVID and most people are working from home, I thought these companies like WebEx and Zoom and all these companies are making it a high priority to make sure it works. And again, I would emphasize one key part which has not been part of the discussion, because this is a very design-infused community. But testing is such a very important part of the process that you got to test early and test often, okay? And that's what they did not do it. And what specific issues we were facing was the buttons were labeled, and we did not know which button would do what action. And there were many parts which were not accessible. But if the buttons would have been labeled, at least somebody should be checking the critical business flow. So whatever the purpose of the website is, if that's not accessible, I don't care what else is on the website or what else your application does. It doesn't matter. I'm simply not able to use it. And in fact, ultimately, I decided, let me try to do the WebEx app, and it worked beautifully. But the website was horrible, and thank you, Mina, for being patient. But but these companies have to realize that these are really software which are being used by the public at large, and this has to be effective.
Absolutely. Randy, I think you're muted. I know you wanted to add on to that, but just to wrap up what Sunish said, yes, the other day I definitely saw that, and to me as a visual person, if you want to put it in context, imagine three unlabeled buttons, three circles that look exactly the same, and and they all have links to them, but you have no idea what happens when you press each circle. That's the feeling that a screen reader has when they go through this app. And that's something that's important for us as developers to realize, because we develop short apps. Apps are everywhere. We're developing personal websites, personal blogs. We're posting on social media like Facebook and Instagram, but really make sure, are you labeling them accurately, and are you actually including everyone to be able to access your content? And I think and if not, as Sunish mentioned very early on, the defect is in that product, and the defect is in your post on Instagram. Yes, Randy, I know you wanted to add on to that.
No, that's great. I wanted to echo what Sanish said as well, which is, I think this gets back to our point that it's more than compliance. It's really the business flows. Have you enabled the ideal business flow? What is the client really trying to complete, and can they complete it? Because if you have an error page that maybe appears 0.2% of the time and it has an unlabeled graphic on it, who cares, as compared to Sanish not being able to get a meeting working the other night. So I think beyond compliance, which is important, I think I wanted to really spend time echoing that point, which is, well, exactly what Sanish said. What are the key business flows? That's what's really going to be important to your customer. I used the ridiculous example as opposed to one unlabeled graphic, on some out of the way page. But I think it's an important distinction. And if you're asking my reaction, sometimes it's similar to Sanish's, and sometimes it's like, oh my God, again. That's his point. Haven't we figured this out yet? Or here we go again. But thank you, Sanish. I really wanted to echo that workflow, because I think that's so much important than checking all the boxes on a checklist sometimes. So
absolutely.
Can I add something as a designer?
Yes, absolutely.
To that point.
Absolutely.
I think that is when you realize how broken the communication is within the design flow. Because we expect developers to know how to do these things, but they might know that you have to put a label on a button, and the label can be button, but it is the job of either the, it's the job of the UX designer to say, in the red line, to say, please add contextual alt text that says the following, and you tell them what it is that you wanted to say. Or if you have a UX writer in your team, the UX writer has to be not only thinking about the word that is inside of this, like what you actually see, but what it has to be heard. Or if you have, which most companies do have, a QA team, the QA team has to have some test scripts for them to know how to test these experiences with accessibility, so that it doesn't happen until somebody gets, here we go again experience. You can tell how broken the system is, because people are like, well, I made it accessible by putting button on button. Well, thank you. I mean, don't work so hard. It has to be more of there has to be a flow. There has to be a conversation, and there have to be some check and balances throughout the experience. So the designers have to know that one of their criteria for the product manager to then submit their design to the developer is that they have to have accessibility guidelines, or that they have checked the color contrast, or that they have created a beautiful pathway when it comes to a keyword access. Like, how would it actually flow if you use a keyword? Like, what they will want it to be like. And then the developers have to have these reference for them to know how to code it for people with disabilities, not just the blind community, but the community like me, who relies heavily on closed captions, because if I have an accent, I know somebody out here is not understanding half of what I'm saying, and sometimes I don't understand what people say because of their accent. So closed caption have, and then somebody in the QA, it has to be checking up that all of these things are put together for the user. So it's not just on us; it's on everybody. And if somebody is messing up, then it's gonna show. It's gonna show when somebody can get into a meeting.
Awesome. And I like the summary of that, where, go ahead, Randy. I can finish my thought later.
Nope. I've spoken enough for now. Okay, please go ahead.
Oh, are you sure? Okay, so no, I just kind of wanted to wrap up the point about responsibility, right? Accessibility is not the responsibility of just accessible people. It's not the responsibility of just allies to accessible users. As Laura mentioned, and as you know, everyone here has iterated over and over again, and as Tiffany also pointed out, you can actually put things into practice. And it is the responsibility of each and every one of us. So it is the responsibility of all of us, and it is the responsibility of developers, designers, managers, and product managers alike. So I really hope we have this takeaway from here when we're kind of like closing up and getting into our technical parts of the panel, that, you know, make sure to know that you, as important as it is to be aware or be a male ally in meetings, it is equally important to be an accessibility ally and accessibility advocate while you are working on the products you do. Everyday products, even if it's your personal website, make sure that, you know, you go through the keyboard, you make sure that it's accessible, you have those closed captions on your videos. It's kind of how I wanted to sum up. Does any of the panelists have anything to kind of add on to that?
I think you summed it up quite well.
Awesome. Well, okay, moving on to some of, oh, it skipped a slide. So we're going to talk about a little more technical details. I know a lot of us are developers here who have logged in, and we're going to talk about digital accessibility and why digital accessibility is so important. And it's because, you know, everything today is digital, and with COVID right now, I know a lot of questions in the chat was also popping up when I briefly kind of read it, and it was around how are we cognitively, as we're building these new online startups, like more online meeting rooms, more online sharing rooms, how are we cognizantly making them accessible? And what can you take, like what are some first steps, basic fundamental steps that you can take as a developer or a designer to actually make a significant difference? So let's actually start by talking about Aria attributes. So Aria is basically accessible, rich internet application, and they're important because that is actually how a lot of screen readers navigate the web application that you develop. So unfortunately, Aria label is not built into HTML5. It's actually an add-on. So research shows that that is why a lot of developers, like 16% of the developers who just go and, you know, search up, okay, how do I make a list or how do I make a table? They consider Aria as an afterthought. So what are some, what's your thoughts on why Aria is important, and what are some ways developers can actively remember to put in Aria labels? Are there compliance tools out there? Are there things that they can do to go and learn more about this?
Definitely. Do you want to I can take a stab at answering that, if you like. So ARIA, like you said, stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. So what happened was when everything kind of moved into the web, there was a need to have these complex UIs, which actually mimic the native UIs to be there on the web, on the websites, on the web applications. And what happened was HTML kind of, so when web content is rendered in a browser, it's basically HTML. And HTML specifications were falling short on some of these complex UI patterns, like a tree or a toolbar. So what happened was there was a need to complement or bridge that gap that HTML specification had. And that's how the way Aria technical specification was born. And actually, it was an IBMer, Rich Schwarzweger, who actually initiated this specification, and uh, IBM donated this to the W3C, and which is now still being developed. And I'm glad to say our team and some of the IBMers are still part of the W3C ARIA standards community. So it's basically complementing and augmenting HTML specifications. But the thing to remember is if you can do something with native HTML, you should do it, because you get so much for free. You get focus management for free. You get keyboard accessibility for free because browsers knows how to handle those. But when you are falling short, be sure, yeah, that's when you want to use Way Aria. And Way Aria has authoring practices that the developers actually can follow. So what a Way Aria does is, like, suppose you're building a tree, then Way Aria gives it a role of tree. So that's how the screen reader knows that this component is a tree. It gives it properties and attributes. It gives it states. But it falls on the developer to manage focus and to make sure that those components, the complex widgets, are keyboard accessible. So it is an add-on, but it is because HTML is falling short. And when you have these really dynamic websites with complex UIs these days that use Ajax and a lot of scripting, you have to augment it with Bay Area. But we have
Awesome.
we just released a new website, www.ibm.com/able, that can give you a lot of guidance on how you can implement ARIA. And we just released a new checker that can automatically check for you if you're implementing it correctly. So
Awesome
Yes.
explanation. That's one of the best I've heard. And thank you for
No.
focusing on standard HTML as a start, Charu. That's
yes.
an awesome
Yeah.
explanation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for actually mentioning HTML, because that was something I was going to bring up when talking about ARIA labels in W3 way. Is if you think about HTML, it's at its core, it is accessible. And that's where we're going to have a future workshop, which gets into the technicalities of how you can start using things like custom elements, which uses very basic HTML and uses very pure JavaScript. And you're not adding on these extra layers, as Chara mentioned, to your application. I'm not like an anti-advocate. I love React. I love Angular. I use them on a daily basis. That's my work. That's what pays the bills. But I am saying that, when you're building a personal website, you don't need an entire React library. You could use standard HTML. You can use custom elements. And that will be a workshop we focus on in the future as well. And additionally, advocating for IBM tools. IBM does have an accessibility standard, and we have actually launched a couple of automation tools where you can plug it into your proctor.js, which is a very common test application, or protractor.js. And then you could also plug it into cypress.js, which is a UI-based testing service. So we will be having more workshops on that in the future as well. So I would like to actually move on to the next question, which is we talked about developer issues and, how can developers be cognizant? But what are some common mistakes that both developers and designers make while using colors in their applications, right? I've seen a lot of white on yellow background, which might be very inaccessible to a low vision user, but it looks really nice and it's really common practice in the design world. So how can you be cognizant of that? Are there tools that designers can use who are not trained to, think about color accessibility, color blindness? Any thoughts on that? Tools, suggestions?
Yeah, I would just kind of, even though I don't use visually, but from my experience, color, designing for right color, it's more of a science, and both a science and an art. And it takes a while to get a really right color combinations because you're trying to address a diverse set of populations. People could be colorblind, people could be using in high contrast mode, in reverse contrast, and there are people with various colorblind issues. At the same time, the color palette which is available to you because you're limited sometimes by the color of your logo maybe, or some of the marketing material which has to be in certain color. So it's a very fine kind of sweet spot here to find. And once you determine that, then it's an easy go after that. One reference I would definitely make is there's a wonderful book I have found, which is available. You can buy it online. It's called Color Accessibility Workflow. It's by Jerry, Geri Cody, Coady. So that is an excellent book. And I think every developer designer should kind of look into that if they want to really become design the right kind of flow. But it comes with a lot of experience. But this will be a great start.
Oh, absolutely. And yes, definitely do check the book out. I think I will ask Sunish he made a couple of book references, and I know I've been getting some private chats on what's the book's name again. So I will ask Sunish, and I will post it on the meetup about all his book references that he made during this panel. And again, this panel is available for recording, so you will be able to go back and watch the panel. Any other inputs on common mistakes with colors and things developers and designers can watch out for, especially early developers or designers?
I just thought of one. So for like form validation, you need a different way besides coloring the cell red if something is wrong. I just thought of that one. I was like, wait, do I have anything to contribute on color?
Yes.
That's another one around like form validation. And that's also for colorblind people, as you pointed out, because I forget the percentage. Charu or someone can help me of men that are colorblind. I think it's at least 10%. So form validation, I think, is another common one.
Exactly. I think the few things that a developer or a designer can do is make sure your important information that's conveying something important to the user is not in color only. You can use color to enhance your appearances, but just make sure don't provide that information in color only, because if someone cannot see that color, they'll miss out that information. And it's always good to just there are some simulators out there on the web as extensions, simulate, color blindness and see if all your content is available and perceivable for users, and just contrast. I think the W3C standard is 4.5:1 contrast of text between the text and its foreground, and if it's bold and big font, then it should be 3:1. So just kind of remembering those things. And there's a great, our checker can check that for you. And then there's a great tool out there, Color Contrast Analyzer by Pauschalo, that can easily do that. So yeah, just make sure that you use those tools and make sure your color is not the only means of conveying information.
Absolutely. And I think that is a very common mistake. The percentage of that mistake actually happening in websites today is apparently around 77%. That is a lot. So I really hope we can spread the knowledge that color is not the only medium. And we really have to make sure that, we add some text, we include the color contrast, and the text is actually big enough and bold enough for users to read that. And for screen readers alike, when you just have color representing, a status, for example, make sure you at least have an icon that's maybe has an alt text indicating what that status is. You don't have to have a descriptive status, which we'll get into in our demo, but having a summarized status is important.
About color.
Yes, please.
I think it's also helpful to orient people around the needs of people who specifically might have trouble with color. So at least the 3 personas that we use at Microsoft The first one would be people with limited perception of color, which is why sometimes using only color to convey an object is hard because they might not be able to see it. There are people who are colorblind, as everyone has mentioned, and so using red, green together, for example, they will not be able to see things like data visualization if you're just using these colors adjacent to each other. And then I think this is kind of tangentially related to color, but I guess color also includes luminance in a way too. But this idea of people with light sensitivity. So oftentimes people with light sensitivity, this sort of like white blinding light can be painful to look at. And so trying to be cognizant of, do we offer dark themes or dark modes in our experiences? Do we ensure that there's not a ton of like bright light always shining in people's faces, or do they have a way to turn it off? That's just some example of some of the different needs that people have when it comes to color and why it's important.
Absolutely. And I'm very glad that you mentioned the difference between like the light and dark themes. That is something that it actually will help develop your code better. It will make you code better because you'll have to code such that your colors are passed in as variables, which means that if there is a need for change in design, your code is that much more malleable in a sense. So when you do end up accommodating for people with light sensitivity, you actually are able to do just that. So thank you so much for bringing up these important topics. We are running a little short in time, so I'm going to quickly do the demo and open it up for questions. So let me switch to the demo. So the link to the demo should be in the chat. If not, Jenna, will you be able to post that link? And can everyone, so here is the screen that we are going to be demoing. This is just kind of a very brief way on how, simple changes on your web page can make a huge difference in terms of accessibility and also just increase the experience of the user. So let's get started. This demo is from the official w3.org. The link is now in the chat. So I'm going to get started. So let's look at some of the annotations here. So these are what's highlighting like the problem. The first thing that we see is, okay, here's this logo, city lights, your access to the city. This is an image, and we immediately know that this is not accessible to screen readers. But when you click on this image, let's look at what the problem is. So the error was not that they didn't have alt text, but the error is that I'm just going to read the alt text out to you, and it's red dot with the white letter C that symbolizes a moon crescent as well as the sun. This logo is full, and I don't even want to complete that because that is not the message I'm getting when I look at that, right? When I look at that logo, I just see a C with city lights, your access to the city, and that's exactly what a screen reader wants to know. It's a logo image that has the word city lights, your access to the city. And if we actually go to an accessible homepage, shortening your alt text to be concise and get to the point is tremendously useful. Because as Randy and Sunish had mentioned earlier, they don't want to be spending too much time on images and trying to understand what an image is doing because their main focus is the critical path that your application is taking. So let's go back to the inaccessible page and let's take a look at one more example that quickly changes how useful. So notice in the right corner of the application, there are two links that said read more and read more. Immediately, you can see that a lot of screen readers oftentimes, well, they use keyboard shortcuts to get to links. So they have just a list of links. They might not actually tab through every single one of these, other links that they see. So they might just directly go to read more. And if you have two links that read the same thing, that's not very useful. Actually, it's not even useful for a visual person because both of these links tell me I have to read more. But then in reality, both of these links do two completely different things. I'm not reading anything with the first link. I'm actually going to go buy tickets for that concert. And with the second link, it's actually asking me to take a survey. So making your links more descriptive automatically betters the user experience, both for visual users, and you're also taking into account the screen reader users. So these are like simple changes, and you can continue to explore all the annotations. I want to get to the questions, and I want to have 15 minutes for the questions, but you can absolutely explore all the annotations on this web page that's in the chat, and see, as Randy mentioned, how simple changes and what do we refer to as inaccessible. So as you can see, it's not only compliance, it's also ease of use. And any final thoughts from our panelists before we start throwing you guys some questions?
I'm going to send this to a lot of people.
Awesome.
We should
awesome.
do that. Let the HTML be the HTML. I think it's an important part. You know, let the HTML do as much work for you as possible. I think it's an important takeaway, but nothing else at this time.
Okay, so we have a question over here from Stephanie. So how do you cope with coworkers who do not give enough value to a good interface design? I'm a developer and I'm also a graphic designer, and sometimes you meet these obstacles. Any advice on how to cope with a coworker who does not value good design practices, I'm guessing?
Go ahead.
Like as a professional, or like how I want to do it? Like how do you?
Yeah.
Also,
Or in the internal
professionally.
in the internal chat, because different there.
But yeah.
You gotta explain. You gotta explain it. People fear what they can't understand. So you just gotta walk them through it. You know.
Yep.
There's empathy in everybody, and for at first glance they might think, "Hey, this is why we're doing this. This is too much. This is too much time. We don't have the budget. This has to go live on Monday. Whatever." But if you walk them through it, they will most likely understand the value of it. And if that doesn't work, then you just take it up to the manager.
I couldn't agree more. When I've shown people actually with a screen reader, okay, if we do it this way, here's the trouble it causes, or not say that and just say, okay, I'm going to listen to it the way that you're proposing. Like, well, I can't understand that at all. And then what if we did it this way? So it's kind of, I think it's close to an empathy-ish kind of session. I'm not a designer, so I may have gotten that wrong, but you're trying to build empathy. So I agree with what Laura, you just kind of show them. And if you can show them as an end user, I get some automatic street cred there. So.
Yeah, I think I absolutely have to agree. If I can add, educating them and building the experience of the end user, I think can definitely change their heart.
The alt text you were reading.
There was a time where when we're doing that migration that I spoke about, the guidelines were a lot because we didn't have them. So when we include them, you end up with a lot of extra work, right? When you don't do it from the beginning, then it becomes extra work. And then like, no, you know what? We're gonna put it to the next release. This is gonna be a P2, a priority number 2 or whatever. So what I used to do back in my like in that time when I didn't have the title that I have now, and now I can no longer do it that way, I used to just go to the person's desk and use my phone and turn on my screen reader and turn off the screen and hand it to them and be like, can you buy something, go through it.
Yep.
And they would, you know, like play with it, and they're like, no, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, this is what you're telling me that it's not a priority. Is it a priority or not? And hey, this is my approach. That's how I do it. Some people call it aggressive. I call it assertive. But sometimes you gotta put your foot down and say, I'm not gonna let you now prototype this because your perspective is that it doesn't have value when it actually does. So sometimes you gotta put your foot down and either guide them to understand or make them understand. It's just, I mean, it's just the way it is.
Absolutely. It's very well put. So there's a question out here for both Sunish and Randy. Sorry, the chat keeps moving up. In this COVID world, with the need for more hands-free, touchless environment to help mitigate germ spreading, do you find navigation environments easier or harder? And how can we do better moving forward? And this person, I believe, is an urban planner.
Okay. Yep.
So these are not tech products, but
yep, a great question and great context for the in different environments in the urban environment. I would say, I mean, if it's for indoor or home environment, these things are very. I mean, this is I've given a talk on accessibility. In that talk you can find on the net somewhere. It's called "Accessibility is not rocket science," So. And it is not anymore. People expect these days that accessibility must be built into everything which get designed, whether it's an app or a website or any kind of device or appliances. Okay, whether it's tickets I want to buy at a train station, those machines should be accessible, and so forth. So everything around us must be accessible. There is no excuse for that in this day and age. Okay, there was one great conference organized by IBM in 2009. It was called Future of Accessibility. And it was actually done at Northeastern University. And I had proposed that any kind of appliance or device or any interaction which is not PC based must have a app which I can use. So even though you may not want that everything in the, let's say, a specific machine or something like that, or interaction with the ATM, if I can do it using my iPhone through a Bluetooth connection and I can interact with that machine using my phone, that would be great. And because iPhones or smartphones are already very well accessible, and if they can make it to communicate, so in fact, I just had moved 6 months ago into an apartment in Seattle, and this is a very modern building, barely a year old. It has all the amenities. It's a fantastic apartment place, but all those appliances were not accessible to me, And these are top of the line appliances, and I wish they would have given some thought to it that to make it accessible, they could have simply made app, just like if you buy a Roomba or a Nest thermostat, you have an app already built in. That makes the device very accessible and very immediately available to people with disabilities also, right? So that's the same theme you got to apply to your devices and your surroundings and the environment, what other things are available in the urban environment. And if you encourage the manufacturers that's part of when they submit the proposal to the city government or to the state government for deploying these devices or different information appliances, whether it's a kiosk or whether it's a check-in place or it's a ticket at a ticket kiosk at an airport. All these things can be easily managed through a iPhone, if they're not made that interface accessible. So that's what I would kind of add to it, that should be a requirement.
Oh, and that's a great suggestion and a great place for innovation as well, right? As you start building more apps and thinking of more use cases, you are actually innovating and you're actually serving a bigger purpose. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
That answers the question of people like, why do we have Alexa integrated in a microwave? Well, this is exactly why, because so I can say, Alexa, turn on the microwave for a minute and a half, instead of having to try to find where the one, because it's not the same in all microwaves, and you don't know which microwave you're gonna have. So it just that's the way my dad used a lot of things through Alexa that I was, we had to organize the house to work with Alexa because of him. And now he's like, Alexa, turn on the TV. Alexa, Alexa. Like my mom is like, who is this lady, Alexa? because he's used her so much. And I understand. Like I very sympathize with the idea because um, it's important for us to understand how technology has to, how we're able to match, not just what we do in the phone, but how we interact with our daily life with what we do with the phone.
Well, this is a great example
Absolutely.
of serving everybody. So, now everybody can use the microwave more easily, or now we don't have to worry about as many people touching a light pole and infecting
Right.
each other. So it's sort of a larger design piece because who doesn't want to turn on the microwave? I won't say the A lady's name because she's right next to me here, but who doesn't want to turn that on? And then we all put more stuff in our cart, using Laura's, which is absolutely true. We all microwave companies put more things in their cart, and I think this is an example how thinking this way. I think so. We're all trying to say makes everybody win because less people are touching light poles, buttons don't break, microwaves work. Whatever your example is, I think that's an example of how this is. And we use the classic wheelchair ramp as an example. Everybody pulls their suitcase up the wheelchair ramp now, but I think this is a modern day equivalent that is very powerful to why this is inclusive, not just accessible.
Absolutely. And thank you for mentioning that as well, both Laura and Randy, as you wrapped it up. It's definitely important. And it basically serves a much bigger purpose than just, that one use case. You're actually innovating on that. So here's a question, kind of a follow-up question that I just got in the chat, which was, how exactly is an iPhone accessible? Isn't it a touchscreen?
Well,
Good question.
yeah. Okay, I'll go ahead. Go ahead. You got it.
Yeah, so I mean that really surprises. That changes the changes the whole paradigm how we think about interfaces, and thanks to part in how Steve Jobs pushed it, how a touch screen can be made useful not just for blind people but for anybody. When initially iPhones were released, the first ones in 2007. People had no clue that that how can they make the touch screen on iPads, on iPods and iPhones accessible, and it really turned its head on because they put the designers and push them through. It really makes it work. And if you just play around with it, just when you open up your settings, turn on the accessibility part, and just another screen either on the iPhone, it's called the voiceover. And so the interface, the way it behaves, it changes, okay? The way it doesn't just activate when you touch it the first time, but it activates only if you double tap it, okay? So the behavior of the interface changes, of the touchscreen changes when it's in the voiceover mode versus without the voiceover. So that's the key difference. But primarily they have included more gestures and more ways you can interact with it. I essentially don't even use as much of touchscreen. I have attached a Bluetooth keyboard to my iPhone and my iPad, and it's very easy to navigate, or I'm putting any search terms because sometimes the keyboards on the iPhone can be kind of hard to type it through. But I know some people are very efficient at it, but essentially that's the way the interaction happens on the touchscreen. Randy, you want to add anything to it?
No, the cool thing is that, well, to your point, the cool thing is anybody can turn this on right now. They want to play with a different interface paradigm. It's just built in right on the phone. So it's not even
Right.
It's not an add-on or anything like that. That's the only thing I'd add. That's a great description.
And from a designer and developer point of view, I would say that the way the IDE, the integrated design environment for the developer or the designers, the way Apple has designed put together, that they have check system to check for accessibility at every stage of your design and development. So that's something which I think we have to emphasize as designers and developers, that you specifically choose those tools which have that capability to test for accessibility. There are lots of tools out there. There are lots of environments, IDE environments, which developers use. But does your environment provide a accessibility checker, or can you integrate a externally available checker into your IDE environment? Those things are very critical to check, and that makes life a lot easier for developer designers And then in this age of AI and automation, I mean, there are lots of tools available. Even in the last 2 years, I've seen like a dramatic difference in what kind of things are available for designers and developers for accessibility.
Absolutely. No, and thank you for answering that. That was a very interesting question. I think we've
question.
wrapped up. Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. And I guess I never thought of asking that myself, but it's also nice to know it's built in. I might play around with that later. But I think that is the end of most of the questions. The others were answered along the way, so they said never mind. And so just another question that someone had was, would it be okay for them to connect with you on LinkedIn or ask the panelists how they can learn more about HTML, CSS, JS, design, UX, and so on and so forth?
Absolutely.
And these are some of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Talking is not one of my problems, as you've seen today.
So I just wanted to add for all of the participants, if you look in the chat, we have all of the LinkedIns there for all of our panelists and speakers. So if you want to connect with them, go ahead and snag their LinkedIn there, and you feel free to connect online.
And the LinkedIns are also on the slides. So if you have the link to the slides, you should be good there as well. But honestly, it's gone a little over time, so apologies for that, but I think it was an absolutely great talk. I learned a lot myself, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from the panelists that they learned a lot of things they had no idea about. So I think we accomplished our goal. Kudos to the entire panel. And I know it's 2 hours out of your day, but thank you so much for taking the time to come to this panel and taking the time to talk with us and, addressing all the topics or accessibility fundamentals. And with that, I can hand it over to Jenna if you have any final thoughts to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of close things out. I can't share, but maybe you could share.
Sure.
I'm not exactly sure.
Is this the slide?
Sure, yeah. So I just wanted to thank all of you for coming. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. As Myrna mentioned, we are going to continue expanding upon this. We have some great content coming up in the next few months where we're going to show you how to implement these things as well into your design and into your development as well. As we've mentioned, everything is accessible through the event slides. I just posted the link for them again. So feel free to reach out. Feel free to continue the conversation and keep this going. Also, Myrna, if you want to go to the last slide. If you're new to IBM Developer and this is your first event, thank you so much for coming. Feel free to connect with us on our other social platforms as well. And I would just like to, I'm going to give myself the, the hook. Thank you all so much for coming, and we will see you next time. So have a week and a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, y'all.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Stay safe. Wear masks.
Yes, wear your mask, please.
Stay
yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Hey, Jenna.
Hey.
Did you need anything from my end, and how did you think that went?
I think it went really great. I think when you close, it'll stop or unless you stop the recording already.
Oh, I haven't.